Do you remember growing your first $900 tomato and thinking, gosh, if I just had gone to the grocery store, it would have been way cheaper? Yeah, same. But we are not doing that anymore. Welcome to the Food, Farm, and Finance Podcast. I'm your host, Austin Graff, and together we are going to build our farms, homesteads, and gardens without destroying our finances. So let's get that bag of soil and money. Welcome to the Food, Farm, and Finance Podcast. I'm your host, Austin Graff, creator and founder of Buzz Blooms, and together we are talking about chickens today. That's my chicken sound effect. I think it's amazing. I should go into sound effects full time for sure. Chickens are making a huge, they're having a moment, okay? The amount of chickens I see on my Instagram feed is absolutely obscene. The fact that everybody and their mama literally has chickens, I think is a sign that millennials have hit their 30s and 40s and we are all struggling. But chickens can be delightful and wonderful. But the thing is, I'm seeing a lot of people spending a lot of money on chickens, and it's a little bit obscene. So I want to kind of pick this apart, show you how you can do it on a budget, and talk about what you could be missing out if you spend way too much on your chicken. So let's not overspend on our chicken obsessions. Let's get into it. But first, a word from our sponsors today. Today's sponsor is yours truly. That's me. Again, the podcast does not have a sponsorship yet because it is not popular and cool yet, but give it time. It will be with your help. I just want to take this moment, though, to remind y'all that in the future there will be sponsorships, and if you could support those people supporting me, that would be wonderful. It helps me make sure that I can keep all of this content free and accessible for everyone, so we can all start growing a better life with Food, Farm, Finance Podcast. Wow, that was my 10-second pitch. That was actually like 30 seconds, so... Back to the episode. So, chickens. Bark, 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 bark. Again with the sound effects. So, I am breaking this episode down into a couple main parts. If you want to skip to that part, don't, because basically I do not stick to script ever. So, starting off, we're going to talk about the cost of eggs currently, if you were to buy eggs, organic, etc. Then we're also going to talk about chicken housing. This is a big one, and I want you to hear this one because it's disturbing and I don't like what I'm seeing. And then we're going to talk about different chicken breeds and how by choosing a specific chicken breed, you can make your chicken egg venture a lot more viable. And then we're also going to talk about the cost to keep your chickens and then how many eggs we're going to get. So let's start off with how many eggs the average U.S. human eats, which would be a wonderful statistic for me to have looked up, but I did not look it up. Instead, I'm just going to use my household. So I go through about a dozen eggs a week. I know each household is different depending on if they like eggs or not, but I chose the number $4.50. I tried to look up average egg cost in the US, but I found based on your geographical location and your egg preferences, it fluctuates so much. And particularly with the data that's coming out of the COVID years, we were seeing a ton of eggflation. So it's like, what is the true egg sale baseline? Nobody knows. Before we went into the pandemic, I know I had once bought eggs at Aldi for 89 cents a dozen, and I was like, this is the cheapest form of protein. I was about to bro out and like start bulking, and then eggflation hit, and I was like, I'm going to have to stay fat and sassy now. So I chose $4.50 because it seems like in all the grocery stores in my area, that price point gives you some options for some cage-free, some potentially, higher tier conventional egg options. They are not the cheapest eggs, right? I went very mid-range. So if you go through a dozen of those eggs each week, that ends up being $234 a year in eggs. Now, local farmers in my area pretty much sell their eggs, their farm fresh eggs, for $7.50 a dozen, up to $10 a dozen, which is insane in the membrane. But that's literally $390 up to $500 a year for eggs. That's a lot of money for eggs. So depending on where you are, depending on your choice of eggs, and I think people get really passionate about their choice of eggs, right? Like, we don't like to think about our chickens in those little sad little cages. We like to make sure that they're frolicking in the field and that wind is blowing through their hair or feathers. But again, we're all out here trying to budget and make the most of things. So sometimes we have to buy the cheaper eggs. So it just really depends on your household. But baseline, we're looking between $200 and $500. And I know that is a huge range, but it is a lot of money on eggs. So we are going to get down into, is it viable to just buy your eggs, or should you maybe consider chickens? I don't know. Let's get into it. Stay tuned. So, chicken housing. This is the first one. Again, no average data on how much a family spends on chicken housing. But what I can tell you that I've seen on Instagram and other social media platforms is people literally spending more on chicken coops than I have spent in the past 3 cars I have owned. I don't know if that says a lot about my cars or a lot about the chicken coops. I think 2 things can be true. But what I need you to know is $5,000 on a chicken coop is absolutely obscene. Like, what are you doing? The amount of time you could buy eggs at $5,000. This doesn't include feeding the chickens. It doesn't include, anything with the chick. Like, it does not include buying the chickens. You could buy the most luxurious farm fresh eggs every single week that costs so much money for like 10 years. For the same that you just paid for that $5,000 chicken coop. Not to mention, if you're buying a $5,000 chicken coop, I just wanted to run it through a little investment calculator. So instead of a $5,000 chicken coop, let's say you reclaim some stuff, right? Like, let's reclaim some wood. Let's buy some new chicken netting, chicken wire, maybe some hardware cloth, etc. Build your own coop, DIY it. Borrow some tools from a friend. You spend $250. You had the $5,000 to buy that chicken coop, but you only spent $250. Look at that self-restraint. You go, boy. I love to see it. If you invested that remaining $4,750 into the stock market, an average return of 6% a year for the next 30 years, you would end up with $27,000. Meaning that $5,000 coop purchase is actually costing you $27,000, okay? Finally, you could use that to buy a car worth having, okay? Not one of those cars I used to drive, that's for sure. And if you get higher returns at like 10%, which, let's be real, historically that is doable, you would be missing out on $82,000. Because you crazy little you was like, I'm gonna buy a chicken coop that is $5,000. Just please don't do that, okay? If you are one of those people that is like out there running a chicken influencer business and you got these cute chickens wearing hats and stuff, and you can use this as a tax write-off and it makes sense because you're blowing up and these chickens are making you mad money, go ahead, put them in the penthouse suite. I don't care. Treat your talent. But if you are like me and you're just out here trying to get some eggs, do not be spending $5,000 on a chicken coop. I think that is obscene and wasteful and a little bit crazy. If you have a chicken coop, though, I would love to know how much you spent on your chicken coop in the comments and how badly I am offending you right now. And please tell me if you're going to keep listening. I think that is interesting. But this is, after all, a podcast that's about gardening and farming on a budget. So, of course, I'm going to tell you, do not spend $5,000 on a chicken coop. Instead, like I said, I think it's very reasonable to spend a few $100s on a chicken coop. Use reclaimed materials, use chicken wire, etc. Just make sure the chicken coop's really safe. And if you don't have the skills to build a chicken coop, I would say learn the skills, because if you're going to buy a chicken coop in that rough couple $100 price point, the quality is pretty low, and I find that the square footage for the chickens is actually very low. A lot of them operate off of like very standard square foot metrics of like minimum square footage for bird, and I don't love that. I like to have my chickens have a little more space, right? Like, this is the point of what we're doing. We're trying to get healthier, more sustainable food, and cramming our little chickens in like the commercial chicken factories do is not achieving that. So I would say find a friend who knows how to build, or just try it out, right? And if it looks not great, okay, well, that's fine. We tried. Whatever. I mean, I think it's worth trying. Or if you do have some restrictions that you can't physically do it, ask for some help. Find someone to potentially help you. I think that's a great option, but try and keep that cost on the chicken coop as low as possible. I don't think your chickens are going to care. They just want somewhere that's not really drafty, that they can get out of the wet if they want, and that they can lay their eggs safely and live safely. So definitely spend as little as possible on your chicken coop. Next up, we've got chicken breed. Now, who would have known that your chicken breed would change the game for you, right? So depending on your chicken selection is going to really determine how economical, did you see what I did there? This whole venture is for you. So each type of chicken lays an approximate amount of eggs each year. So there are some that are more catered towards laying eggs, and then there are some that are more catering towards like just looking cutes. So depending on your goals, is going to determine what chicken you would like to have. So silky chickens, for example, are adorable little floofy guys. They are so cute. I've seen them wearing crochet hats on Instagram, and I don't know about you, but I feel very compelled to have a chicken in a crochet hat. I think that's something that I need in my life. But I do not have chickens as a chicken influencer, so I think that silky chickens are maybe not the right move for me. Silky chickens only lay approximately 120 eggs a year. So if you have 3 of those, you're looking at 360 eggs, or approximately 30 dozen eggs. Basically, 3 chickens that are silky chickens wouldn't even provide my household egg needs. So it's definitely something to consider. Granted, they're a little smaller, they probably eat a little bit less, but they are notoriously not amazing egg layers. And they're also known to go broody, which means they sit on eggs, and during that time, they're not trying to lay eggs, they're just trying to make little babies hatch. So they do not lay a ton of eggs. Granted, they are so cute, so if you are a chicken influencer trying to pop off, this might be the chicken for you. Meanwhile, there's other chickens that are more on the commercial end. A very common homestead type chicken is the Rhode Island Red. They can produce over 300 eggs a year, meaning 3 chickens can produce 90 eggs a year, or approximately 75 dozen eggs. So if you are eating a dozen eggs a week, those 3 chickens are going to leave you with 23 dozen excess eggs, which is amazing. And you're probably going to up your egg consumption if you have all of those eggs, and you can share the rest with your family. You can maybe even sell the rest. If you sold the rest at that market value for that like high-end $7.50 local farm fresh eggs, you would have 172 extra bucks in your pocket from these chickens. So I do think that it's really important when you're looking at potentially starting a chicken coop to select your breed appropriately, right? So if you're wanting a bunch of eggs, let's choose these higher laying egg layers. If you're wanting it to just be cute, then go ahead, get silkies. I'm not trying to tell you not to get silkies. What I'm trying to do is show you that they're maybe not the most viable economical choice, right? That does not mean we can't have nice things. If you want a fluffy chicken, go ahead and get the fluffy chicken. But just know that that is not necessarily the most budget friendly or financially friendly choice in chicken. So just be prepared for that, right? So that's completely fine. I do see this trend a lot that people are doing, and it's basically they want the rainbow egg collection, right? So they want these green eggs from the olive layers. They want the blue eggs. They want these really dark eggs from a French Marans. Like, let me tell you, these gorgeous dark eggs. Ooh, I love me some Marans eggs. They are stunning. But you can't just have chickens willy-nilly. Actually, you can, and people do, and lots of people do, because chickens multiply worse than cats. And I don't mean like these chickens are having babies. I mean people get more chickens once they have chickens. Like, so I'm telling you to get 3. all these people in the chicken world probably have 75, and I myself have at one point had over 50 chickens because they're just so addictive. Like, they're cute. You want one of every breed. You want one that lays every color egg. But if you're trying to be financially responsible, doing that is really no better than that like $5,000 chicken coop, right? So you need to know what you're doing. You need to know, am I trying to do this to supply food economically for my family and increase the quality of food that I'm consuming? Am I doing this because this is a hobby and it brings me a lot of joy? Do I need 500 dozen eggs a week? No. Am I doing this for a business venture? I need a lot of eggs. These colorful eggs that pop in these dozen eggs help me reach, a higher premium that I sell them for, and people really want them. There's a lot to consider here. Are you an influencer? Do you need these gorgeous kaleidoscope of eggs for your post? There's a lot to talk about. But my general recommendation for someone who's just looking to put additional food on the table at a low price point is to get one of these more commercial, less fancy, less frilly breeds like these Rhode Island Reds or maybe the Red Stars or Black Sexling. Like, keep it simple, keep it productive, and enjoy the chickens by all means. But let's keep it nice and light, all right? So this brings us into food cost. Now, for 3 chickens, I've done some rough addition because it's really, really challenging to price out feed. Feed is changing all the time, and based on what type of feed, if you want GMO free, if you want, organic, if you want to get feed from this feed mill, if you go to a local co-op, it just depends so much based on your area, what you're feeding your birds, and then also what your household can contribute, meaning if you have gardens, if you have household waste that these birds can eat. So for 3 chickens, I estimated roughly $70 a year to feed those chickens. Now that is just if you are just feeding the chickens, right? You let them free range sometimes, you give them food, and then you also need to give them grit and oyster shell. Grit is what you put in there. Basically, it's like little tiny stones, and they will eat them with their feed, and they live in their craw, one of those things. I don't know, the little chicken bobby. Basically, it's their throat, and it helps grind up the food that they consume. It helps grind up the grains that they're eating. And then the oyster shell is going to help make for a more solid, firm eggshell on your egg. So those are basically amendments for chickens, right? It's like if you have cows, they need mineral, etc. So all those things considered, you're looking at maybe $80, $85, maybe $100 depending on what you're doing with the chickens. My biggest thing with this amount of chickens is if you only have 3 chickens, odds are you have and produce enough household waste to easily cut that food bill by half, maybe even all the way if you are a gardener that's actively producing lots of produce and has a lot of garden waste. I think that is my biggest reason to suggest having a light amount of chickens, a smaller flock, because it's so easy to offset their food with your household waste. Basically, it creates a nice closed loop system, and you can take your household waste of your kitchen scraps, you feed the chickens, and then those chickens also produce eggs and manure, and that manure can be used to fertilize your gardens and your lawns, and then those eggs can be used to eat into your kitchen, and then the eggshells can go into your compost, and it can be a full loop system and a really good closed loop system that can help eliminate a lot of food waste and a lot of the cost of the chickens. And basically you can end up just kind of having these chickens for next to nothing at this point because they're using what you are not using. So they're just your cleanup squad. 3 chickens is perfect for this, and I definitely highly recommend that amount. But if you want to have a larger, more large flock and maybe start making a little extra money off of it, I have run numbers for 25 chickens. So basically you'll be going through a bag of feed a week. I found some feed bags as little as $11.25. That is ludicrous, and I don't think people are regularly going to find that. But just know, to feed those 25 chickens, Obviously, with 25 chickens, the potential for you to produce enough household waste and garden waste to sustain those chickens is very unlikely unless you are just like buying bulk produce and just throwing it away, basically. The cost to keep them is going to start around $585 if you can get that really cheap feed, or upwards and onwards, right? So depending on the breed you have, that could be viable, or it could start getting a little dicey. So for example, if you are spending a lot more on feed for like silky chickens, right? And you end up spending around $884 in feed every single year. Your silky chickens, 25 chickens, 120 eggs per chicken, you're looking at, I don't know, let's see, a fair amount of eggs coming from that. So 120 times, this is math I can and shouldn't do, 3,000 eggs, right? So dividing that by 12, you're ending up with 250 dozen eggs. So if you were able to potentially purchase that or sell that at that $4.50 mark, you're looking at around $1,000 and $1,125, excuse me, for these eggs. As you can see, the margins can get really tight on if that's viable at that stage, right? So you could argue that there's no way you're eating that amount of eggs each year with just your family, and it's a lot of work to just maybe make an extra couple $100 depending on that feed bill. Whereas the Rhode Island Reds are considerably more viable. So if you're looking at doing something like this for a kind of a side hustle venture, 25 Rhode Island Reds are going to produce around 7,500 eggs a year, resulting in about 625 dozen a year, which is about $2,812 if purchased at that $4.50 mark. Granted, if you have the ability in your market to sell them for that more $750 mark, you could really do quite a number. You could hit more that $4,687 mark. Of course, your feed costs are still high, but as you can see, that is a lot more viable. And, if you're making $2,500 to $3,000 a year, that's a pretty decent side hustle. But I would say you'd have to really account for all the additional work that goes into just keeping your chickens. I think time-wise, you're really probably not even breaking even. But, if that is something that brings you joy, I think that's fine. So overall, now that you've heard my spiel about housing and what breeds to choose, etc., I think the biggest thing I would suggest is starting really, really small. Getting a really small flock that is very sustainable and that can thrive off of a lot of your kitchen and garden waste. So choosing about 3 hens, I would choose those Rhode Island Reds. You're going to end up with a ton of eggs to support your family. You can still sell that extra eggs or donate them, give them away for free, because honestly, if you're producing these eggs for less than nothing, what a wonderful way to be generous in your community by sharing those eggs with people in need. So I think that is definitely something that I would do. I would not suggest having those 25 chickens. I would not become a chicken hoarder unless that's just what you're wanting to do as a hobby. I personally like to spend my money on other things, but I do think having a really small backyard flock is really impactful, really powerful. And a lot of local jurisdictions now allow you to get hens, no roosters, and a lot of them allow a couple, just a few birds. So this fits perfectly for the average little household in America. So definitely recommend that. As far as the chicks or chickens, I think this is another question I get a lot. Should I buy chicks or should I buy full-grown hens? I think it's something to note that if you're buying chicks, there is going to be about a 5-month, 4-month, sometimes 6-month, depending on the breed, delay before you get eggs. So my recommendation, if you live somewhere that has winters, I like to buy my chicks in late fall, late to early fall, and that gives me time to raise my birds, feed the birds all through winter, keep them nice and tucked in and nice and warm, and then they're prepared to lay eggs in the spring. I know typically people buy their chicks in the spring, But in my experience, you only get a few months before that winter sets in, and these chickens are like, I am going on strike. No matter how much light you give them, sometimes I think chickens just do what they want. So I definitely think that is an option. I did price out how much it would cost to get a few chicks up to speed, and basically it depends on how many chickens you're going to get, obviously, but I would say it's kind of a wash on whether you raise your chicks yourself or if you buy full grown laying hens, if you can find full grown laying hens. So I think you get a lot more flexibility buying the chicks by having that disposition you're looking for. I also think it's a really fun period, and you really get to bond to your birds and experience chicken ownership in the fullest. But if you come across some really great laying hens, just go ahead and grab them. It's fine. You do not have to raise the chicks. I do not have advice on whether raising chicks or buying the chickens is more financially viable, because there was just too many variables involved in that. Maybe that's another episode. But I hope I've inspired you to buy chickens, or maybe to downsize your chicken obsession. Or if you have spent $5,000 on your coop, I need to know about it, okay? So comment, let me know how many chickens you have. Let me know how much your chicken coop costs. Like, tell me your details in the bottom. I'd love to know in the comments. I would love to know what you are doing with chickens, and if you think it's a practical addition to your household, and if you think it's financially viable. Also, please share this episode. Make sure all of your family and friends know. Send it to your crazy chicken friend down the road. We are coming at you next week with more episodes, not about chickens, about other things, but I hope to see you then, and thank you all for listening today.